A janitor touched the rich girl's piano. Seconds later, her tea action stunned the entire room. They said no one touches the Steinway. Not unless you're in the program. Not unless you're wearing silk or tuxedo. Not unless your name glitters on the brochure next to words like virtuoso or wunderkind. And certainly not if you're wearing a janitor's badge and pushing a mop across the polished marble of Carnegie Hall's south wing. But rules have a funny way of unraveling in silence. It happened just past 8 in the evening, on the night of the Manhattan Rising Stars Gala, a black tie celebration of the nation's finest young musicians. The concert hall gleamed like something sacred. Velvet curtains, crystal chandeliers, waiters carrying silver trays of champagne and imported cheese. The kind of place where people use words like maestro and interpretation with a straight face. Raymond was just finishing his shift. He'd been working there for almost 6 years. Nobody really noticed him anymore, which suited him fine. He walked slowly toward the corner of the stage, carrying a rag and a bottle of polish. His job for the evening was to clean the piano bench and buff the legs of the grand piano before the gala began. It wasn't unusual, but something was different tonight. The moment his hand touched the side of the piano, just a momentary contact, like someone checking the warmth of a kettle, he heard a voice behind him. Sharp. Cold. "What do you think you're doing?" He turned. A young woman in a silver gown stood with arms crossed. She looked barely 18, but spoke with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. That was Charlotte, the darling of the conservatory, the one whose fingers could allegedly tame Beethoven and make him weep. Raymond straightened. "I was just cleaning," he said. Her eyes flicked to the rag in his hand, then to the spot where his fingers had grazed the piano's glossy black surface. "That's a Steinway Model D," she said, as if explaining to a child. "Do you have any idea what that means?" Raymond said nothing. Charlotte took a step forward. "My entire career could depend on this instrument. One wrong touch, one slip of oil from an untrained hand, and that's it. Why are you even up here?" A few heads turned. Some guests had begun to trickle in, and the conversation had drawn enough attention for people to glance over from their glasses of champagne. Raymond didn't argue. He simply bowed his head slightly and took a step back, but something made him pause. Maybe it was the way her voice rang with entitlement, or the way the guests chuckled behind their flutes of sparkling wine, amused by the exchange. Maybe it was the fact that, for the first time in nearly a decade, he had touched a piano and felt something stir. He looked at the bench, then at Charlotte. "I could just check the tuning," he said softly. "Only a moment." She laughed. "You tune this piano?" Someone snorted behind her. A stage manager moved toward him, whispering something about time and schedule, but Charlotte raised a hand. "No. Let him." The room fell quiet. "Go on," she said, eyes glinting. "Let's hear what the janitor thinks music is." There are moments when a room stops breathing. This was one of them. Raymond sat. His fingers hovered over the keys. He pressed one, then another. He adjusted the bench, exhaled, and placed both hands gently on the keys. No one expected what came next. He didn't play a piece from the program. He didn't play anything written in a book. What he played sounded like memory, like cracked pavement after rain. It was fragile and immense all at once. The way silence becomes loud in a room full of expectation. People stopped speaking. A man near the front lowered his phone and just listened. Charlotte didn't move. The melody wasn't about skill. It was deeper than technique. It was about absence, about holding on to something that was already gone. There were no words, only notes. but somehow, everyone understood. When he stopped, the silence was unbearable. Then, slowly, someone clapped. Then another, and another. It wasn't polite applause. It was disbelief, reverence. Raymond stood up. He didn't bow. He didn't smile. "I think it's tuned fine," he said softly, then walked off stage without another word. Charlotte remained frozen, her hands at her sides, her throat tight. For the first time, she had nothing to say, and that was only the beginning. He didn't return the next day. No one saw him at the service entrance. No one mopped the marble halls or emptied the trash bins near the green room. The usual quiet hum of Raymond's evening work, steady, precise, was absent. It was as if the man had evaporated, leaving only echoes behind. But the music lingered. In the hours after the performance, the gala changed. The drinks kept flowing, the lights still shimmered, but a current had shifted. Conversations turned speculative. Who was he? Some kind of street musician, maybe. No, did you hear that phrasing? He trained somewhere, I'm telling you. He's a savant, a musical savant. It happens. Charlotte didn't speak much. She stood by the grand piano for a long time after Raymond left, staring at the keys like they'd betrayed her. Her fingers twitched, but she didn't play. When people came to congratulate her, she smiled without hearing them. Later that night, back in her apartment overlooking Central Park, Charlotte sat down at her own piano and tried to replay what he had done. She remembered the first few notes. Then the line twisted. Something cracked. She tried again. Nothing. It wasn't that the notes were wrong. It was that they meant nothing. She slammed the lid shut and didn't touch the instrument for 2 days. It was a junior journalist from a local arts magazine who found the thread. He'd been assigned to cover the gala, some light fluff piece about emerging talent and donor contributions. But he couldn't let go of the mystery man at the piano. Something about that performance stayed in his bones. His name was Eli Matthews, 26, underpaid, overcaffeinated. He spent the next morning combing through old press clippings, looking for anything. He didn't even know the man's last name, just Raymond, from the janitor badge someone had glimpsed. But his gut told him the answer was buried in music history, not on the streets. He was right. 4 hours into his search, a name surfaced. Raymond Ellis. It was buried in a decade-old article in the New York Times. The headline read, "Principal pianist of Philharmonic steps down after family tragedy." Eli leaned closer. The photo was grainy, black and white. A man in his early 40s, tall, dark-skinned, refined, wearing a dark suit and holding a little girl on his lap. Both were smiling. The article detailed a glittering career. Graduate of the Juilliard School, winner of 3 major international piano competitions before the age of 25, debut solo at Avery Fisher Hall, and then, one day, gone. The tragedy had barely been reported. The Philharmonic had released a statement about personal loss and an indefinite leave. The obituary came a week later. Her name was Elise. She was 10, his only child. A car accident in upstate New York, a winter storm, a drunk driver. No one saw Raymond Ellis again. Until now. Eli did what any ambitious reporter would. He wrote the story. It ran online first, then in the Sunday print edition under the headline, "The Janitor Who Played the Gala, The Return of Raymond Ellis." It spread like wildfire. By Monday morning, it had been shared over 200,000 times. By Tuesday, Calls poured in from every music academy and conservatory in the country. Offers, tributes, apologies, but no one could find him. The Philharmonic declined to comment. His old apartment had long been sold. There was no website, no social media, no number to call. It was as though he'd stepped out of a dream. Meanwhile, Charlotte read the article again and again. She studied the photo, the daughter's face, the way Raymond had smiled, not like a performer, but like a man who'd once had everything he needed in the world. She sat down at her piano again. This time she played slowly, not to impress, not to rehearse, just to feel. And for the first time in years, she cried at the keys. Across the city, in a modest rented room above a laundromat in Brooklyn, Raymond folded the Sunday paper and set it aside. He had known they'd find out. He hadn't played to be found. He hadn't played to make a point. He just wanted to touch the piano, to feel it under his fingers again, to see if it would still speak to him, or if time had buried that part of him forever. But it hadn't. The sound had come back, the grief, the light. He stared at his hands. They didn't shake anymore, and that scared him more than anything. There was a time when Raymond Ellis couldn't walk through Lincoln Center without someone stopping him. A firm handshake, a grateful nod, sometimes a trembling hand that clutched a program and asked for a signature. He remembered those nights, stepping out onto the stage, lights warm on his face, tuxedo starched to perfection, and silence waiting like a held breath. Then came the first note, and the world would dissolve. Back then, music wasn't just a career. It was blood. It moved through him like oxygen. He didn't play pieces. He told stories, dug into something ancient, human, and fragile, and let it unfold one note at a time. But all of that was before. The past didn't come to Raymond in full scenes anymore. It arrived in flickers, the smell of old sheet music, the way Elise used to lean against his shoulder at recitals, her giggle when she hit the wrong note and called it jazz. He remembered the last evening they were all together. He'd just finished rehearsals. Elise had drawn a picture of the piano on a napkin, adding smiley faces to each key. "This one's you," she'd said, pointing to middle C. "You're always in the center." And then, the snowstorm. The road that shouldn't have been taken. The headlights. The moment of nothing. She was gone before he reached the hospital. Everything afterward was noise. People speaking, offering condolences, his agent, the orchestra board, his students, the press. It all blurred into a cold, colorless hum. Raymond disappeared. He sold his instruments, donated the awards, canceled everything. Even when the Philharmonic offered him a sabbatical, a paid return, anything he needed, he didn't respond. He left music the way one leaves a burned house. For years, he floated. A string of odd jobs: warehouse loader, library assistant, nighttime security. The quieter the work, the better. It wasn't shame that drove him underground. It was the fear that if he touched the keys again, they would only scream her name. Eventually, he found the janitor job at Carnegie Hall. It felt like a cruel kind of poetry, cleaning up the very world he used to command. But the irony gave him a sense of control. As long as he stayed in the shadows, the past couldn't follow. But music has a long memory. It started coming back to him in pieces, a chord echoing in the stairwell, the soft hum of a violin from rehearsal rooms he passed by. Some nights, when the hall was empty, he'd stand near the piano and just listen to its silence. Then one night, he lifted the fallboard, just to clean. But his hand stayed there. Then a key, then a note. The sound hurt, like light pouring into eyes kept in darkness too long. But he didn't stop. He played a single measure, one he'd written for Elise, and then walked away. But the lock had turned. He hadn't planned to play at the gala. He was only supposed to polish the bench, wipe down the legs. But the moment Charlotte spoke, the condescension in her voice, the dismissal in her eyes, it cracked something open. Not rage, recognition. He'd seen that hunger before, in himself, in others. That endless striving to be seen, to be told you were special, that your fingers were worth the spotlight. It was a hunger that music never fully satisfied, not unless it was rooted in something real. So he sat down, and when he played, it wasn't to prove a point. It wasn't even for the crowd. It was for her. Elise. A small part of her still lived in that music, in the way the notes curved, in the silence between them, and for a brief moment, he let her breathe again. He left the stage feeling hollow and full all at once. But he knew now. He couldn't hide from music forever. Back in Manhattan, Charlotte stood at the front steps of Carnegie Hall, holding the newspaper article in her gloved hands. She hadn't told anyone where she was going. She just needed to see the place again. Not from the performer's entrance. Not from the grand stage. From his side, she walked around the building, past the service entrance, down the alley where staff took smoke breaks and delivery men unloaded crates of bottled water. A door opened. An older man with a worn badge stepped out, lighting a cigarette. Charlotte approached. "Excuse me," she said. "Do you know where I could find Raymond Ellis?" The man squinted at her, then chuckled softly. "You and half the city." She hesitated. "I'm not here for an autograph or a quote. I need to speak with him." He gave her a look. Long. Then nodded toward the street. "Try Brooklyn," he said. "Above the laundromat on Fulton, 3rd floor. Ask for Raymond, but I'll tell you something, miss." "Yes?" "If you're going to ask him to play again, don't." She blinked. "Why not?" "Because if he plays," the man said, "he's not just reopening a door. He's walking back into a room filled with ghosts." Charlotte didn't knock right away. She stood outside the laundromat for a long time, watching the machines through the dusty glass. They spun with that slow, rhythmic whirl, as if time itself was on rinse cycle. Above, a faded staircase led to the 3rd floor. The buzzer by the door didn't have names, only peeling numbers. Her fingers hovered over the button marked 3. Then she pressed it. A quiet hum. No answer. She was about to walk away when the door clicked. No voice. Just an unlocked latch. Raymond didn't look surprised when he opened his apartment door. He wore a plain gray sweatshirt and old slacks. No expression. No questions. Charlotte opened her mouth to speak, but the words she'd practiced on the train, the careful apology, the elegant explanation, vanished the moment she saw his eyes. "Come in," he said quietly. She stepped into a small, neat room. Books lined the walls. No pictures. A single armchair. A kettle on the stove. And in the corner, half covered with a sheet, stood a worn, upright piano. The silence between them was heavy. "I shouldn't have said what I said," Charlotte began. Raymond sat down without replying. "I didn't know who you were," she added. "I didn't know what you'd been through." He looked at her then, calm, but not forgiving. "I wasn't anyone that night," he said. "I was just a janitor cleaning a piano." Charlotte swallowed. You were more than that. Everyone knows it now. That's not what matters. She took a step forward. I've played piano since I was 5. Teachers, competitions, scholarships. They always told me I had talent, that I was different. Raymond didn't interrupt. But I didn't feel anything, she continued. Not really. I played notes. I played them right. But when you sat down at that Steinway, it was the first time I realized how hollow I sound. A long silence. I want to feel what you felt, she said. I want to learn. Raymond looked at her for a long moment. Then he asked, why? The question pierced deeper than she expected. Because I don't want to fake it anymore, she whispered. Raymond stood, walked over to the piano, pulled the sheet back. I'm not your teacher, he said. I'm not a mentor. I'm not coming back. I'm not asking for a comeback, she said quickly. I'm asking for help. He stared at the keys. Play something, he said. She hesitated, then sat. The bench creaked beneath her. She played Debussy, one of the pieces she knew by heart. Her fingers were precise, fluid, practiced. She moved through the phrases the way she'd been taught, technically flawless. But when she finished, Raymond only said one word, empty. Charlotte flinched. Your hands play, he said, but nothing else does. You don't even breathe when you play. You hold your breath like you're waiting for applause. Her voice cracked. What do I do? Start over. She blinked. What do you mean? Play the first note again, but this time, let it mean something. She pressed a single key. Softly. Raymond shook his head. Why did you choose that note? He asked. She shrugged. I don't know. That's the problem. He sat down beside her. Close your eyes, he said. Don't think about technique. Don't think about the room. Just remember something. Something real. A moment. A loss. A joy. Anything. She hesitated, then slowly let her eyes close. She remembered a hallway. She was 7. Her father standing by the front door, suitcase in hand, the cold wind blowing in. He didn't look back. He never came back. Her finger found a key. One note. Low. Quiet. Then another and another. It wasn't a song. It wasn't even a melody. It was raw, unshaped emotion. A child at the keys, grieving for something unnamed. When she opened her eyes, her cheeks were wet. Raymond was still beside her. That, he said, was music. They met like that over the next few weeks. No schedule, no fanfare, just moments. 1 hour at a time. They didn't speak much. Raymond gave no lessons in the traditional sense. He didn't assign scales or pieces. He asked questions. What did this note cost you? What are you hiding between these bars? Would you play this if no one listened? Charlotte struggled. She fought her habits. The obsession with control, speed, perfection. She hated how slow it all felt, how exposed. But she kept coming back. One evening, it was snowing outside. The world was wrapped in silence. Charlotte arrived with red fingers and a frozen nose. Raymond poured her tea. She sat at the piano without a word. He didn't ask her to play. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside was sheet music, handwritten, faded, the ink slightly smudged. What's this? She asked. A piece I never finished, he said. She scanned the page. No title, just the heading. For Elise. Charlotte understood without asking. Will you play it? She asked gently. Raymond shook his head. It was hers. I'm not ready. She traced the notes with her eyes. Can I? He paused, then nodded. She played. The notes were strange, tender, aching. Some sections flowed like water. Others stumbled, raw and unresolved. But as she reached the end, her hands trembling, she felt something she'd never felt before. She wasn't just playing for herself. She was carrying someone else's voice. Raymond stood by the window. Snow fell, soft and steady. Next week, he said, still looking outside, there's a winter recital at the conservatory. Charlotte turned. You should play something. Her heart stopped. Me? Raymond turned to face her. Play the piece. For Elise. Play it for someone other than me. Charlotte shook her head. I'm not ready. He smiled, the smallest smile. You never are. That's how you know it's real. The hall wasn't as grand as Carnegie. It was smaller, quieter. The kind of venue where folding chairs creaked and old radiators hissed in the corners. But the stage was polished, the lighting warm, and the audience respectful. Students, parents, faculty, a few curious journalists who had caught wind of a surprise performance by the girl from the gala. But Charlotte didn't think about them. She only thought about the music. She hadn't told anyone what she was playing. Not even the recital organizers. They assumed it would be something safe, something showy. A Chopin etude, maybe. Or Liszt. Something to prove she still belonged at the top of the program. But she knew better now. She stood behind the curtain, heart pounding. Her fingers were ice. The printed copy of For Elise sat on the stand inside. Not the famous Beethoven piece. Something no one in that room had heard before. Something that wasn't even finished. But it was his. And in some strange, impossible way, it was hers too. Raymond didn't sit in the front row. He stood in the back, by the exit. No one recognized him. No spotlight. No attention. Just a man in a long coat, watching from the shadows. He wasn't sure why he'd come. Maybe to hear her interpretation. Maybe to let go. Maybe because she reminded him that there was still something worth salvaging from the wreckage. Whatever the reason, he stayed. Charlotte walked to the piano alone. The crowd clapped politely. She gave a small bow, sat, adjusted the bench. Her eyes swept across the audience, then paused, just for a second, at the back of the room. He was there. She looked down, breathed, then she played. The first notes were tentative, soft. They hung in the air like fog, drifting between breaths. The melody crept in, tender and broken. Each phrase felt like a question, answered not with resolution, but with deeper longing. She played slowly. She didn't rush the pauses. She listened to them, the spaces between the notes, the way the piano seemed to inhale with her. By the middle of the piece, the room was utterly still. Something strange was happening. The audience wasn't just watching a performance. They were witnessing a conversation. Between Charlotte and the keys, between grief and grace, between a past that refused to be buried and a future that had finally stopped running. When she reached the final bars, the ones Raymond had left unfinished, she hesitated. Then gently, she resolved them. Not with brilliance, not with bravado, with love. The last note faded. There was no movement for several seconds. Then, not a standing ovation, not a roar, but something quieter, more sacred. A wave of slow, rising applause. Somewhere near the front, a woman wiped her eyes. In the back, a conservatory professor sat forward in stunned silence, and by the exit, Raymond lowered his head, eyes glistening, heart pounding like it hadn't in years. He didn't stay for the rest of the recital. He stepped into the cold evening, letting the door close behind him. The streetlights flickered, snow fell. He walked with no destination in mind, just steps, just breath. 2 weeks later, Charlotte found a package on her doorstep. No return address. Inside was a small wooden box, old but well kept. She opened it slowly. A metronome. Vintage, handcrafted, the kind conductors used in the old days. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. No message. Just the final page of For Elise, now complete. Charlotte smiled, not because she had impressed him, but because at last she had reached him.